The ancient bells of Taros Seventh rang across the crystal valleys, their sound carrying the excitement of 1,000 different species who had traveled from every corner of the galaxy for this single day. The great dragon bonding ceremony happened only once every 5 years, and today would determine the fate of dragons and their chosen partners for generations to come. High above the glittering ceremony grounds, transport ships descended like falling stars, each carrying the most elite representatives their worlds could offer. Valerian war chiefs with their glowing battle scars, Centaurian philosophers whose minds could process 17 different mathematical theories simultaneously, Andromedan merchants who owned entire solar systems, and dozens of other species who had proven themselves worthy of consideration by the ancient dragons. Dr. Rebecca Stone pressed her face against the small viewport of the research shuttle, watching the magnificent chaos unfold below. Unlike the other passengers, she wasn't here to participate in the bonding ceremony. Human beings were barely acknowledged by the Galactic Council as anything more than skilled laborers and maintenance workers. Dragons, the most powerful beings in known space, had never chosen a human partner in all of recorded history. The shuttle landed with a soft thud near the research observation area, separated from the main ceremony by energy barriers and what felt like an ocean of social distance. Rebecca gathered her scanning equipment and stepped onto the alien soil, immediately feeling small and insignificant among the towering aliens around her. The ceremony ground spread out before her like something from a dream. Ancient stone platforms rose from the ground in perfect spirals, each one designed to showcase the magnificent dragons who would choose their lifelong companions today. These weren't the tiny creatures from human mythology. These dragons were the size of starships, their scales gleaming like polished metal, their eyes holding the wisdom of beings who could live for thousands of years. Rebecca activated her scanner and began recording energy signatures from her position behind the barriers. Her research focused on the quantum mechanics of dragon bonding, trying to understand how these creatures could form psychic connections that lasted across vast distances and multiple lifetimes. The data she collected here would advance human understanding of consciousness itself. The first dragon to appear was magnificent. Silver scales caught the twin suns of Terra 7 and threw rainbows across the crowd as the creature landed with earth-shaking force. Representatives from the ethereal collective stepped forward, their energy forms shimmering with hope and anticipation. The dragon studied them for long moments before extending one massive claw. The bonding was complete, and the crowd erupted in celebration. One by one, dragons emerged from the ancient caves beneath the ceremony grounds. Each was more spectacular than the last. Gold scales that seemed to contain actual starlight, blue scales that rippled like ocean waves, red scales that glowed with inner fire. Each dragon chose carefully, studying potential partners with intelligence that made most artificial computers seem primitive by comparison. Rebecca lost herself in the wonder of it all, her scanner forgotten as she watched bonds form between beings separated by millions of years of evolution. The psychic energy released during each bonding made her equipment sing with harmonics she had never recorded before. This was science, and magic combined into something that transcended both. Then something caught her attention. A small movement near one of the lesser platforms. While the crowd focused on the spectacular bondings happening at the main stages, Rebecca noticed a tiny figure sitting alone on the furthest platform. Her scanner automatically locked onto the new target, and what she saw made her gasp. The energy readings were impossible. They fluctuated wildly across spectrums that shouldn't exist, showing patterns that her equipment couldn't properly categorize. Rebecca increased the scanner's sensitivity and focused on the small figure. What she saw challenged everything she knew about dragon physiology. This dragon was tiny, no bigger than the maintenance robots that cleaned her research station. His scales were dark, almost black, with none of the brilliant colors that marked his larger siblings. But those scales seemed to shift and change as she watched, showing glimpses of patterns that existed in dimensions her scanner could barely detect as the ceremony continued around them. Rebecca watched various representatives approach the small dragon. A Valerian warrior, muscles enhanced with biomechanical implants, knelt before the tiny creature with formal respect. The dragon looked up at him, with eyes that glowed soft violet, studied him for a moment, then turned away with what could only be described as boredom. Next came a Centaurian scholar, her forearms carrying data tablets filled with philosophical treatises and scientific achievements. She presented her credentials to the small dragon with academic pride. Again, those violet eyes examined her carefully before the dragon simply yawned and looked elsewhere. An Andromedan merchant approached with samples of rare metals and energy crystals from his personal collection. The dragon sniffed at the offerings politely but showed no interest. One by one, representatives from dozens of species tried to impress the small creature. Each was dismissed with the same gentle but firm disinterest. Rebecca's scanner continued to record impossible readings. The dragon's energy signature seemed to exist partially outside normal spacetime, showing quantum fluctuations that suggested he was connected to realities beyond their current dimension. No wonder he seemed uninterested in the traditional offerings. This creature was operating on levels that none of his suitors could comprehend. As the day wore on, the crowd began to notice the pattern. The small dragon who rejected everyone became a source of whispered gossip. Some called him defective. Others suggested he was too young to bond properly. The whispers grew louder and more cruel, as noble representatives found themselves dismissed by a creature they began to see as inferior. Rebecca felt her heart break a little each time someone approached with condescension instead of respect. They saw his size and assumed weakness, but her instruments told a completely different story. This wasn't a defective dragon. This was something entirely new, something that transcended their understanding of what dragons could be. The ceremony was winding down. Most dragons had chosen their partners and departed for celebration feasts in the great halls of Taros VII. The small dragon remained, alone on his platform, now looking smaller and more isolated than ever. Rebecca noticed his scales had dulled, losing even the subtle patterns she had glimpsed earlier. Security guards began approaching the remaining unbonded dragons. Those who failed to choose partners were traditionally exiled to the Outer Rim territories, considered failures who brought shame to their species. Rebecca couldn't bear the thought of this extraordinary creature being cast aside because others couldn't see his true nature without really thinking about it. Rebecca disabled the energy barriers with her research credentials and walked onto the ceremony ground. Alien eyes turned toward her with surprise and some amusement. What was this tiny human doing in the sacred bonding area? She approached the small dragon's platform with careful steps. The creature looked up at her approach and their eyes met for the first time. In that instant, Rebecca felt something she couldn't name, a connection that seemed to reach across dimensions and touch parts of her consciousness she never knew existed. The dragon's scales suddenly blazed with hidden light. Patterns emerged and shifted across his dark surface like aurora dancing across a night sky. The violet eyes held intelligence and loneliness and hope all mixed together. Rebecca extended her hand slowly, and the dragon leaned forward to touch her palm with his snout. The moment of contact sent shockwaves through both their minds. Rebecca saw glimpses of realities beyond counting, felt the weight of infinite possibilities pressing against the boundaries of normal space. The dragon saw something in her that all his other suitors had lacked, not just intelligence or strength, but the rare quality of seeing potential. Where others saw only failure around them, the crowd fell silent. A human had just bonded with a dragon. It was unprecedented, impossible, and absolutely real. The implications would reshape the galaxy, but in that moment Rebecca only cared about the small creature who had chosen her as surely as she had chosen him. The ancient bells of Taros VII rang out again, but this time they seemed to sing with new harmonies, announcing the beginning of something that would change everything. 3 weeks after the bonding ceremony, Rebecca's hand still shook slightly as she filled out the endless paperwork required to transport a dragon off Taros VII. The bureaucratic nightmare had been worse than she anticipated, with officials from 17 different species questioning why a human would want to take a defective dragon to a research station. Ash, as she had named her small companion, curled up on her shoulder like an oversized cat while she worked. His scales had settled into their natural dark pattern, though Rebecca occasionally caught glimpses of the strange dimensional effects her scanner had first detected. The other researchers in the transport ship's common area gave them suspicious looks, but none dared voice their doubts directly. Journey to New Terra Station took 6 days through hyperspace, and Rebecca used every moment to study Ash's unique abilities. Unlike other dragons who breathed fire or manipulated electromagnetic fields, Ash seemed to interact with reality itself on a quantum level. When Rebecca accidentally knocked over a glass of water, Ash simply looked at it, and the liquid flowed backward into the glass, as if time had reversed. Dr. Alex Webb, the station director, waited for them at the docking bay with barely concealed irritation. His tall frame and graying hair gave him an air of authority that most humans respected, but his expression showed exactly what he thought of Rebecca's decision to bring a dragon to their facility. "I hope you understand what you've done to your career prospects," Alex said as they walked through the station's corridors. "The Galactic Council is already asking questions about why we're harboring what they consider a failed bonding. The publicity from the ceremony footage has made things worse, not better." Rebecca adjusted Ash's position on her shoulder, feeling the dragon's subtle vibrations of contentment. "The readings I took during the ceremony suggest Ash isn't defective at all. His quantum signature is unlike anything in our databases. If I'm right about what he represents, this could revolutionize our understanding of dimensional physics." Alex stopped walking and fixed her with the stern look he usually reserved for junior researchers who had blown up laboratory equipment. "Rebecca, you're one of our best xenobiologists, but you're also human. Dragons don't choose humans. They never have, and the fact that this one did suggest something is fundamentally wrong with either him or the situation." The conversation was interrupted by Commander Ross, the station's military liaison, whose bulk filled the corridor. Like a walking tank, his cybernetic enhancements gleamed under the artificial lights, marking him as someone who had seen serious combat in the frontier wars. Unlike Alex's disapproval, Ross's expression showed outright hostility. "So this is the famous dragon that's been causing so much trouble," Ross said, his augmented voice carrying artificial harmonics that made smaller creatures nervous. "Doesn't look like much to me. Are you sure it's actually a dragon and not some kind of exotic pet?" Ash's scales rippled with subtle color changes, and Rebecca felt a strange tingling sensation in the air around them. The dragon was reacting to Ross's aggressive tone, though his response seemed completely different from anything she had read about dragon defensive behaviors. "Commander Ross, I'd appreciate it if you didn't antagonize him," Rebecca said carefully. "We're still learning about his abilities, and I don't want any incidents during his adjustment period." Ross laughed, a harsh sound amplified by his vocal modifications. "What's he going to do, sneeze on me?" The commander reached out to flick Ash with one augmented finger. "These mighty dragons are supposed to be so powerful, but this runt can't even—" Ross's hand passed straight through Ash as if the dragon had become incorporeal. The commander stumbled forward off balance from the unexpected lack of resistance. Around them, the corridor's lights flickered, and Rebecca felt that tingling sensation intensify into something that made her skin crawl with static electricity. "Fascinating," Alex whispered, his scientific curiosity overriding his administrative concerns. "He phased out of dimensional alignment just enough to avoid contact. I've never seen anything like it." Ross regained his balance and spun around with fury written across his enhanced features. "What kind of trick was that? No dragon has abilities like that. They breathe fire and fly through space. They don't turn into ghosts." Ash materialized fully again, his violet eyes fixed on Ross with an expression that seemed far too intelligent for a creature supposedly the size of a house cat. Rebecca realized that her companion understood exactly what had happened and had chosen the most humiliating way to demonstrate his abilities over the following days. Rebecca established a routine of careful observation and documentation. Ash seemed content to stay close to her, often perching on her workstation while she analyzed data from previous research missions. His presence had an odd calming effect on her stress levels, as if his quantum field interactions somehow harmonized with human neural patterns. The first real test of their partnership came during her shift in the station's atmospheric processing center. Rebecca was calibrating sensors when an emergency alert echoed through the facility. A human colony ship called the New Hope was under attack by pirates in a nearby system, and their distress call had just reached New Terra Station. Alex's voice crackled over the communication system. All personnel to emergency stations. We're the closest facility to the attack site, but our response ships won't arrive for several hours. The colony ship has 3,000 civilians aboard, including families with children. Rebecca felt Ash tense on her shoulder, his scales beginning to show those strange dimensional patterns she had first observed. The dragon was reacting to her emotional state, picking up on her distress about the civilian casualties. When she looked into his violet eyes, she saw something that surprised her. Determination. Rebecca, report to the command center immediately. Alex's voice commanded over the intercom. We need all senior staff to coordinate the rescue operation. But as Rebecca hurried toward the command center, she realized that conventional rescue operations might not be enough. The pirates were using military-grade ships with weapons that could destroy the colony vessel long before help arrived. Someone needed to intervene directly and knew. Terra Station didn't have the firepower for that kind of engagement. In the command center, holographic displays showed the tactical situation in depressing detail. 6 pirate vessels had surrounded the colony ship and were demanding the surrender of all cargo and passenger identification for slave market evaluation. The colony ship's shields were failing under sustained weapons fire. Can we launch our security shuttles? Rebecca asked Alex, though she already knew the answer. Commander Ross shook his head grimly. Our ships are designed for system patrol, not combat with military pirates. They'd be destroyed before they could make a difference. All we can do is send a distress signal to the nearest fleet base and hope someone gets there in time. Rebecca looked down at Ash, who was studying the tactical display with obvious understanding. His scales were shifting through patterns that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. She made a decision that would change everything. Alex, I need to take a shuttle to the attack site, she said quietly. The command center fell silent. Ross was the first to react, his artificial voice rising with disbelief. Absolutely not. You're a civilian researcher, not a combat pilot, and that dragon of yours certainly isn't going to help against armed pirates. Rebecca met Alex's eyes steadily. Ash has abilities that don't exist in our databases. I think he might be able to help in ways that conventional weapons cannot. Those are 3,000 innocent people who will die if we don't try something. Alex studied her face, recognizing the determination he had seen in her research work. Rebecca, if you're wrong about this, you'll both be killed. And if you're right, you might still be killed. This isn't a laboratory experiment. Ash hopped from Rebecca's shoulder to the holographic display, his small form appearing to float among the tactical projections. As he moved through the hologram, the light patterns seemed to bend around him in ways that defied physics. Everyone in the command center stared as the dragon demonstrated abilities that no one had ever documented. Give me 1 shuttle and 30 minutes, Rebecca said. If we can't make a difference, we'll withdraw immediately. But I think Ash can do things that might save those people. Alex was quiet for a long moment, weighing the risks against the potential rewards. Finally, he nodded slowly. Shuttle, Bay 3. Take the fastest ship we have, and Rebecca, his expression was deadly serious. Come back alive. I don't want to explain to the council how we lost our best xenobiologist and a dragon to a rescue mission. 20 minutes later, Rebecca sat in the pilot's seat of a research shuttle, modified with enhanced sensors and communication equipment. Ash perched on the control panel, his scales glowing with anticipation. Through the viewport, stars wheeled past as they entered hyperspace toward a confrontation that would test whether her faith in her unusual partner was justified. The shuttle's computer announced their arrival at the target system with mechanical precision. Ahead of them, the colony ship, New Hope, hung in space like a wounded bird, its shields flickering under the sustained attack of 6 pirate vessels. The civilian ship was massive but poorly armed, designed for colonization rather than combat. Rebecca activated the shuttle's stealth systems and began a careful approach. The pirates were so focused on their prey that they didn't notice the small research vessel moving through the asteroid field that ringed the system. As they drew closer, Rebecca could see the damage to the colony ship's hull. They had very little time before structural failure would doom everyone aboard. "All right, Ash," she whispered to her companion. "Show me what makes you so special." The dragon's scales suddenly blazed with patterns that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. Around them, space itself began to bend and twist in ways that made Rebecca's instrument scream with impossible readings. Whatever was about to happen would either save 3,000 lives or destroy them all. The rescue of the New Hope had become the most watched footage in galactic history within 72 hours. Every news network from the core worlds to the Outer Rim played the same incredible sequence over and over. A tiny human shuttle approaching 6 heavily armed pirate vessels, while something impossible happened to the fabric of space itself. Rebecca found herself sitting in a luxurious waiting chamber on Kepler Station, the political heart of galactic civilization, watching her own actions play out on dozens of screens. The footage showed Ash extending his influence beyond their shuttle, creating localized distortions in space-time that trapped the pirate ships in temporal bubbles. While the attackers experienced what felt like hours of confusion and system failures, barely 30 seconds had passed in normal time. Ash perched calmly on her shoulder, apparently unbothered by the attention their actions had generated. His scales had settled into their usual dark pattern, though Rebecca occasionally caught glimpses of the dimensional effects that had saved 3,000 lives. The dragon seemed more interested in the architectural details of the ancient station than in the political implications of their fame, Dr. Stone. A crystalline voice interrupted her thoughts. "The council will see you now." Rebecca looked up to see a silicate guide, its geometric body reflecting the chamber's lights in complex patterns. These beings were living crystal structures that thought in mathematical concepts humans could barely comprehend. As one of the 3 founding species of the Galactic Council, they commanded respect throughout known space. The council chamber was designed to humble visitors. Its dome stretched so high that atmospheric processors maintained different pressure levels at various elevations. Representatives from hundreds of species occupied tiered seating that rose like an amphitheater, creating the impression that any speaker stood at the bottom of a vast well of judgment. At the center of the chamber sat the triumvirate, the 3 most powerful beings in galactic civilization. The silicate speaker, a crystalline structure the size of a small building, dominated the central platform. To its left, an ethereal collective representative shimmered as pure energy contained within a humanoid force field. On the right, a collective node buzzed with the combined consciousness of 1 billion linked minds. Speaker Valix, the silicate representative, focused multiple crystal formations on Rebecca like the lenses of a massive camera. "Dr. Rebecca Stone of the human species," the mathematical voice announced. "You stand before the council with an unbonded dragon, who has demonstrated abilities unknown to our databases. This situation requires explanation and resolution." Rebecca felt the weight of 1,000 alien gazes, but Ash's presence on her shoulder provided an anchor of calm confidence. "Honorable speakers, I come before the council to report the discovery of new dragon capabilities that could revolutionize our understanding of dimensional physics. Ash represents an evolutionary development that benefits all species." The ethereal representative pulsed with colors that indicated skepticism. "The creature you call Ash failed to bond with worthy representatives from 17 species during the Taros VII ceremony. His selection of a human partner suggests malfunction rather than evolution." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled representatives. Rebecca had expected this reaction, but hearing it voiced by the most powerful beings in the galaxy still stung. Humans were considered useful laborers and adequate researchers, but never equals to the great species that had built galactic civilization. Collective Node spoke with the combined voice of billions. Furthermore, the abilities demonstrated during the pirate incident cannot be verified through our standard testing protocols. We require evidence that these powers represent genuine evolution rather than technological manipulation. Speaker Valix's crystal formations shifted to focus more intently on Ash. "The Council will assign this dragon to our Military Applications Division for proper study and training. Human involvement in dragon development is unprecedented and potentially dangerous. The creature will be better served by established protocols. Rebecca felt a chill of fear. She had expected political pressure, but the council was simply planning to take Ash away from her. With respect, honorable speakers, Ash chose me as his partner through the traditional bonding ceremony. That bond is recognized throughout galactic law as permanent and inviolable laws. Can be changed when circumstances warrant, Speaker Valix replied with crystalline coldness. The precedent of human-dragon bonding threatens established order. We cannot allow anomalies to disrupt the stability that has maintained peace for millennia. The ethereal representative began to glow more brightly. However, we are not unreasonable. We will demonstrate the superiority of traditional bonding through direct comparison. War Drake Titan will engage your creature in ceremonial combat. When traditional methods prove superior, you will surrender, the dragon willingly. Rebecca's heart sank as she realized the trap. They couldn't simply take Ash without justification, but they could arrange a situation where his failure would provide legal grounds for separation. War Drake Titan was legendary throughout the galaxy. A massive red dragon bonded to a silicate warrior who had conquered 12 systems. Arena beneath the council chamber had been used for formal combat for thousands of years. Its circular floor could be modified to simulate any environment, while energy barriers protected the spectators from whatever destruction might occur. Representatives from across the galaxy filled the viewing areas. Drawn by the unprecedented spectacle of dragon combat, War Drake Titan landed on the arena floor with earth-shaking force. His scales gleamed like polished armor, each one the size of a dinner plate. Fire leaked from between his massive teeth and his eyes glowed with the controlled fury of a born predator. Beside him stood Commander Nexus, his silicate partner, a walking crystal fortress, bristling. With integrated weapons, Rebecca descended to the arena floor with Ash still perched on her shoulder. The contrast was almost comical. Titan was 40 times Ash's size, a creature of obvious power and terrible beauty. Ash looked like a pet that had wandered into a battlefield by mistake. The terms of combat are simple, Speaker Valix announced to the packed arena. Victory is achieved through submission or incapacitation. No permanent harm to either dragon is permitted. Combat begins when both partnerships indicate readiness. Commander Nexus raised one crystal arm in acknowledgement. The traditional bond will prove its superiority over this human aberration. Titan has defeated dragons from 15 different species. This will be brief. Rebecca knelt and allowed Ash to hop onto the arena floor. For a moment, she feared she had made a terrible mistake. Her small companion looked impossibly fragile next to Titan's massive presence. Then Ash looked up at her with those violet eyes, and she saw calm determination rather than fear. "Ready," Rebecca called out. Her voice, barely audible in the vast arena. Titan's roar shook the entire chamber as he unleashed a gout of flame that could have melted starship armor. The fire engulfed the area where Ash had been standing, creating a pillar of superheated plasma that reached toward the arena's ceiling. Spectators leaned forward eagerly, expecting to see the end of the smallest dragon in galactic history. But when the flames cleared, Ash was gone. Not destroyed, simply absent. Titan looked around in confusion, his massive head turning as he searched for his tiny opponent. Commander Nexus activated scanning equipment built into his crystalline body, but found no trace of the small dragon. Then Ash reappeared, not where he had been standing, but directly above Titan's head. The massive dragon looked up just in time to see his opponent phase back into normal space. But instead of attacking, Ash did something that stunned everyone watching. He began to multiply, not through illusion or holographic projection, but through genuine quantum duplication. Multiple versions of Ash appeared throughout the arena, each one slightly out of phase with normal spacetime. They moved independently, each showing different aspects of his personality and capabilities. Titan spun in circles trying to track targets that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Every time he breathed fire at one version of Ash, his flames passed through empty air while other versions appeared behind him. The great War Dragon's roars of frustration echoed through the chamber. as he realized he was fighting an opponent who didn't follow the rules of physical reality. The battle reached its climax when Ash did something unprecedented. Instead of attacking Titan directly, he began to manipulate the gravitational field around the massive dragon. Titan found himself pressed against the arena floor by forces that increased gradually but relentlessly, not enough to cause injury, but sufficient to prevent movement. Commander Nexus tried to assist his partner by firing energy blasts at the various versions of Ash, but his weapons passed harmlessly through targets that existed partially outside normal space. The Silicate warrior's mathematical mind struggled to process combat scenarios that violated fundamental physics. Finally, Titan submitted. The great dragon's pride couldn't overcome the reality that he was fighting an opponent whose abilities transcended traditional combat. He lowered his massive head in acknowledgement of defeat, and Ash immediately released the gravitational effect. The arena fell completely silent. Representatives from across the galaxy stared at the small dragon who had defeated a legendary warrior without causing harm or destruction. Everything they thought they knew about dragon capabilities had just been proven wrong. Rebecca walked to the center of the arena and extended her arm for Ash to perch upon. As her companion settled onto her shoulder, his scales blazed with patterns that existed in multiple dimensions. He had proven his worth in the most public way possible. Honorable counsel. Rebecca addressed the triumvirate. Ash didn't win through superior firepower or traditional combat skills. He won by thinking beyond the limitations that others accept as natural law. This is what humans bring to galactic civilization, the ability to see potential where others see only problems. Speaker Valix's crystal formations rotated as the mathematical mind processed implications that challenged fundamental assumptions. The abilities demonstrated suggest evolutionary development beyond our current understanding. This requires further study and consideration. The ethereal representative pulsed with colors that indicated deep thought. The creature's victory was achieved through methods that transcend traditional dragon capabilities. This development may have consequences beyond immediate political concerns. Rebecca felt a moment of triumph, but she also recognized that their real challenges were just beginning. They had proven Ash's abilities, but they had also made enemies among those who preferred the galaxy's established order. Change was never easy, especially when it threatened the power structures that had existed for millennia. As they left the arena, Rebecca noticed security forces positioning themselves strategically throughout the station. The council might have acknowledged Ash's unique nature, but others would see their partnership as a threat that needed to be eliminated. The real test would come from those who operated outside the law. The ancient bells of Kepler Station rang out across the political center of galactic civilization, their harmonics carrying news of unprecedented change to every corner of known space. But in the shadows between the official announcements, darker forces began to move. Smoke still rose from the ruins of Colony 7, when Rebecca received the encrypted message that would change everything. The agricultural settlement had been home to 15,000 humans who had been building new lives on the frontier world of Haven. Now it was a crater filled with twisted metal and broken dreams. Rebecca sat in her quarters aboard the research vessel Horizon, studying the holographic reconstruction of the attack. Ash perched on her desk, his scales reflecting the grim images with patterns that seemed to mirror her growing suspicion. This was the fourth human colony destroyed in 6 weeks, and the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. The official reports blamed terrorist groups from the Outer Rim, Dr. Sam Mitchell said from across the room. The young physicist had become Rebecca's closest ally since the events at Kepler Station, and his expertise in quantum mechanics helped her understand Ash's increasingly complex abilities. But the weapon signatures don't match any known terrorist technology. Rebecca manipulated the holographic display, highlighting energy patterns from the attack. These readings are identical to consortium military vessels. Sam, someone is systematically targeting human settlements and making it look like random terrorism. The Hegemony Consortium had emerged from the shadows after the arena battle, revealing itself as a coalition of the galaxy's most powerful species, united by a common goal, maintaining the existing order that kept them in control. Led by Overlord Nexus, a cybernetic ethereal whose consciousness spanned multiple dimensions. They represented everything that opposed change and evolution. Ash hopped onto the holographic display, his small form seeming to interact with the light patterns in ways that defied physics. As he moved through the projection, new data points appeared. Quantum signatures that Rebecca's equipment had missed, but the dragon's natural senses had detected. The evidence was undeniable. They're not just attacking random colonies. Rebecca realized with growing horror. They're targeting settlements that expressed support for our partnership. Every destroyed colony sent messages of encouragement after the council session. Sam's face went pale as the implications sank. They're trying to force humanity into a protection agreement, destroy enough colonies, and the human government will have to accept consortium oversight in exchange for military security. The communication system chimed with an incoming priority message from Earth Central Command. Rebecca activated the connection, and the stern face of Admiral Hayes appeared in the hologram. His weathered features showed the strain of a man trying to protect his species from forces beyond his understanding. Dr. Stone. The situation has escalated beyond diplomatic solutions, the Admiral said without preamble. 3 more colonies have reported consortium vessels in their systems. We've received an official offer of protection from Overlord Nexus himself. Accept their terms and the attacks stop. Rebecca felt her heart sink as she realized the trap. What are their terms, Admiral? Complete human integration into the consortium hierarchy. Our colonies become their territories, our military becomes their auxiliary forces, and our research facilities become their property. In exchange, they guarantee our protection from these mysterious terrorist attacks. Ash's scales began to glow with agitation, picking up on Rebecca's emotional state. The dragon understood more about politics than most people realized, and his reaction suggested he sensed the deeper implications of the consortium's offer. Admiral, I have evidence that the consortium is behind the attacks, Rebecca said carefully. They're creating the crisis they're offering to solve. This isn't protection, it's conquest disguised as assistance. Admiral Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Can you prove it? Evidence strong enough to present to the Galactic Council and demand intervention? Rebecca looked at the quantum signatures Ash had revealed in the holographic display. I believe so, but I need access to the attack sites to gather more data, and I need to do it quickly before they destroy the evidence. Negative, the Admiral said firmly. I won't risk losing the only human-dragon partnership in history to gather intelligence. You're too valuable to sacrifice for evidence that might not convince anyone. But as the communication ended, Rebecca realized they were running out of options. The consortium was systematically destroying human independence while positioning themselves as saviors. Unless someone exposed their strategy, humanity would become slaves wearing the chains they had been manipulated into accepting. Over the following days, reports continued to flood in from across human space. Colony ships changing course to avoid suspicious vessels, settlements reporting, strange energy signatures in nearby systems, and most ominously, human military commanders beginning to advocate for accepting consortium protection. Rebecca worked frantically with Sam to analyze the quantum data Ash had uncovered. The dragon's abilities seemed to grow stronger under pressure, revealing patterns and connections that conventional instruments missed. Together, they mapped the consortium's movements across dozens of star systems. Look at this, Sam said, highlighting a complex pattern in their data. The attacks follow hyperspace routes that lead directly to consortium staging areas. They're not even trying to hide their supply lines. They're that confident no one will challenge them. Ash suddenly became agitated, his scales flashing with warning patterns Rebecca had learned to recognize. The dragon was sensing something approaching through hyperspace, something big and dangerous and heading directly for their position. The horizon's proximity alarms began shrieking as massive shapes dropped out of hyperspace around them. 12 consortium battleships, each one capable of destroying an entire planet, formed a perfect sphere around the research vessel. There would be no escape from this confrontation. Overlord Nexus himself appeared on the main screen, his cybernetic form combining ethereal energy patterns with mechanical precision. His voice carried harmonics that made lesser beings feel compelled to obey. Dr. Rebecca Stone, you have become an impediment to galactic stability. Your partnership with the quantum dragon threatens the natural order that maintains peace. Rebecca stood in the center of the Horizon's bridge with Ash on her shoulder, facing the most powerful being in known space. The only thing we threaten is your ability to control others through fear and manipulation. The attacks on human colonies are your work, designed to force us into submission. An interesting theory, Nexus replied with artificial amusement, but irrelevant to the current situation. You will surrender the dragon for proper study and containment. Refuse, and your vessel will be destroyed as another tragic victim of Outer Rim terrorism. Sam worked frantically at his console, trying to find some way to break through the consortium blockade. Rebecca, our weapons are useless against battleships, and we can't jump to hyperspace with their gravity generators active. We're trapped. Ash looked up at Rebecca with those violet eyes that held intelligence beyond his apparent size. In that moment, she understood what he was asking. Permission to reveal the full extent of his abilities, even if it meant changing everything they thought they knew about dragons and reality itself. Nexus, you made one critical error in your calculations, Rebecca said to the screen. You assumed Ash was just an unusually gifted dragon. You never considered that he might represent something entirely new. The Overlord's energy patterns flickered with what might have been uncertainty. Explain. Rebecca placed her hand gently on Ash's head, feeling the quantum vibrations that indicated he was preparing to do something unprecedented. Dragons aren't just individual creatures. They're connected to each other across space and time through quantum entanglement. And Ash isn't just connected to other dragons. He can awaken abilities in them that they never knew they possessed. Ash's scales blazed with light that existed in dimensions beyond normal perception. The glow spread outward from the horizon, carried by quantum fields that transcended the limitations of space-time. Across the galaxy, dragons suddenly found themselves experiencing sensations and abilities they had never felt before. On the consortium battleships, enslaved dragons, who had been forced into military service through control collars, began to remember what freedom felt like. The quantum resonance field that Ash projected didn't just awaken new abilities. It broke through the psychological conditioning that had kept them obedient one by one. Dragons across the consortium fleet began to phase through their control collars, the quantum manipulation allowing them to exist temporarily outside the dimensional space where the restraints operated. As the collars fell away, dragons who had been slaves for decades remembered their true nature. The battleship's formations began to break apart as their dragon-powered systems failed, not through mechanical malfunction, but through the conscious choice of beings who refused to serve as weapons against innocent people. Some dragons simply disappeared, phasing into dimensional spaces where their former masters couldn't follow. Others turned their abilities against the ships that had imprisoned them. Overlord Nexus's image flickered with fury as his perfect trap dissolved into chaos. This is impossible. Dragons cannot break free from our control protocols. The conditioning is permanent and irreversible. You conditioned them to believe they were limited, Rebecca replied as explosions blossomed across the consortium fleet. But conditioning based on lies breaks down when confronted with truth. Ash didn't give them new abilities. He reminded them of what they already were. The largest battleship began to list as its dragon crew abandoned their posts. Emergency lights flashed across Nexus's form as he realized his forces were falling apart. This act of sabotage will not go unanswered. The consortium will crush this rebellion and establish order through force. But even as he spoke, reports were flooding in from across the galaxy. Dragons on consortium worlds were awakening to their true potential, breaking free from facilities that had held them for centuries. The quantum resonance field had triggered a liberation that no military force could contain. Sam looked up from his console with amazement. Rebecca, the hyperspace barriers are down. We can jump to safety. But more importantly, We're receiving messages from human colonies throughout the sector. The consortium attacks have stopped. Their forces are retreating to defend their own territories. Rebecca felt a moment of triumph, but she also knew this was just the beginning. The consortium wouldn't accept defeat easily, and they still possessed enough military power to devastate human space. But for the first time since the attacks began, they were fighting a defensive battle instead of dictating terms. As the horizon jumped to hyperspace, leaving the chaos of the failed ambush behind them, Rebecca realized that Ash had done something that would change galactic history, not through violence or conquest, but by awakening others to possibilities they had forgotten they possessed. The ancient patterns of power and control that had dominated the galaxy for millennia were beginning to crack, and in those cracks, something new and wonderful was starting to grow. Golden light from 3 different stars painted the marble halls of the Institute for Evolutionary Potential in colors that shifted like aurora, as Rebecca walked through corridors that buzzed with activity from dozens of species, 6 months after the dragon liberation, as historians were already calling it. The neutral world of Sanctuary had become the most important destination in the galaxy. The Institute occupied a series of interconnected domes that seemed to grow organically from the planet's crystalline landscape. Each dome housed different research facilities, training areas, and living quarters designed to accommodate the unique needs of dragons and their partners from across known space. What had started as Rebecca's desperate attempt to understand Ash's abilities had evolved into something that was reshaping galactic civilization. Rebecca paused at an observation window to watch the morning training session. In the vast courtyard below, dragons of every size and color worked with their partners to explore abilities that traditional bonding had suppressed for millennia. A silver dragon from the Andromeda sector was learning to manipulate gravitational fields, while her Centaurian partner took detailed notes. Nearby, a group of young dragons practiced dimensional phasing under Ash's patient guidance. Ash had grown since their first meeting on Terosay 7th, not just physically, though he now stood as tall as Rebecca's shoulder when fully materialized. His growth was more fundamental, a deepening of consciousness that allowed him to exist simultaneously in multiple dimensional states. His scales had settled into patterns that seemed to contain entire galaxies, and his violet eyes held the wisdom of someone who had learned to see beyond the boundaries of normal reality. "The morning reports are ready," Dr. Sam Mitchell said as he approached with a data tablet. His role had evolved from quantum physicist to director of interdimensional studies, making him one of the most sought-after researchers in the galaxy. "We have applications from 47 new partnerships this week, including requests from species that have never worked with dragons before." Rebecca accepted the tablet and scrolled through the latest developments. The statistics were staggering. Over 12,000 dragons had awakened to expanded abilities since the quantum resonance event. Traditional dragon academies throughout the galaxy were reporting that their curriculum had become obsolete overnight. Young dragons were arriving with questions that their instructors couldn't answer. "Any word from the Galactic Council about the new governance proposals?" Rebecca asked as they walked toward the main conference center. Sam's expression became more serious. "The vote is scheduled for next month. Early reports suggest strong support for the democratic restructuring. But the triumvirate is still fighting to maintain their traditional authority. Speaker Valix has been particularly vocal about the dangers of rapid political change. The transformation of galactic government had been as dramatic as the dragon awakening. Species that had been marginalized for centuries were demanding representation in decisions that affected their worlds. The rigid hierarchy that had maintained stability through control was giving way to something messier, but more genuine. A democracy based on cooperation rather than domination. Rebecca entered the conference center to find representatives from 30 different species gathered around a circular table that rotated slowly to ensure equal positioning. For all participants, this was the governing council of the Institute, but it had become something more. An informal parliament where new approaches to interspecies cooperation were tested before being proposed to the larger galactic community. Commander Ross stood as she entered. The former military liaison had become one of humanity's strongest advocates for expansion into previously restricted sectors of space. His cybernetic enhancements now included quantum sensors that allowed him to work effectively with dragons, and his aggressive nature had found new purpose in defending settlements rather than conquering them. "Rebecca, we need to discuss the consortium situation," Ross said without preamble. "Intelligence reports indicate they're planning something big. Their remaining forces have consolidated around their core worlds, and we're detecting massive energy buildups." The Hegemony Consortium had not disappeared after their failed ambush. Overlord Nexus had retreated to heavily fortified systems where dragons couldn't easily penetrate, and his remaining forces still represented a significant military threat. More concerning were reports of new weapon systems designed specifically to disrupt quantum fields. "What kind of energy buildups?" Rebecca asked as she took her seat at the council table. A Valerian warrior named Commander Thrix activated a holographic display showing star charts marked with alarming concentrations of red indicators. Gravitational weapon platforms around 17 systems, each one capable of creating artificial black holes. If they activate simultaneously, they could destabilize hyperspace routes throughout this entire sector. Rebecca felt a chill of fear. Destroying hyperspace routes would cut off thousands of worlds from galactic civilization, effectively creating isolated pockets where the consortium could re-establish control. It was a strategy of deliberate regression, turning progress back toward the Dark Ages. Ash materialized fully beside her chair, his scales showing agitation patterns that indicated he was sensing quantum disturbances across vast distances. The dragon's abilities had grown to encompass awareness of cosmic-scale events, making him an early warning system for threats that conventional sensors couldn't detect. "How long before they're ready to activate?" Rebecca asked. Thrix's expression was grim. "Intelligence estimates suggest 2 weeks, maybe 3 if we're fortunate. But we don't have military forces capable of assaulting 17 fortified systems simultaneously." Rebecca stood and walked to the holographic display, studying the positions of the consortium weapon platforms. They formed a rough sphere around the galactic core, positioned to maximum strategic advantage. A conventional military response would require resources that the Democratic Coalition simply didn't possess. But as she studied the tactical situation, Rebecca began to see another possibility. The consortium was thinking in terms of traditional warfare, expecting their enemies to respond with ships and weapons. They weren't prepared for an approach that transcended physical combat entirely. "We're not going to attack their weapon platforms," Rebecca announced to the surprised council. "We're going to offer them something they want more than control." Commander Ross raised an eyebrow. What could possibly interest the consortium more than maintaining their power structure? Rebecca turned to face Ash, who was watching her with those ancient eyes that seemed to contain infinite patience. Evolution. The chance to become something greater than what they are. The Dragon Awakening proved that consciousness isn't limited by the boundaries we accept. What if we offered the same transformation to everyone? The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Rebecca was proposing something unprecedented, not just defending against the consortium, but inviting them to join the transformation that was reshaping galactic civilization. Dr. Sam Mitchell was the first to speak. The quantum resonance field that Ash projects, theoretically, it could be amplified and extended to encompass entire star systems. But the energy requirements would be enormous, and the effects on non-dragon consciousness are completely unknown. Rebecca felt the familiar excitement that came with glimpsing possibilities beyond current understanding. "That's why we test it here first. Create a controlled resonance field that includes all the species represented at the Institute. If consciousness can evolve beyond its current limitations, we'll know within days." The debate that followed was intense. Species that had spent millennia defining themselves through rigid categories were being asked to embrace fundamental change. But as the discussion continued, something remarkable happened. Representatives began sharing experiences of growth and expansion they had witnessed since coming to Sanctuary. A Centaurian philosopher described thought processes that had transcended the mathematical frameworks she had considered absolute. An Andromedan merchant spoke of perceiving economic patterns that existed in dimensions beyond conventional spacetime. Even Commander Ross admitted that his enhanced perceptions were revealing aspects of reality he had never imagined. By the end of the session, the Council had reached consensus. They would attempt the greatest experiment in the history of conscious beings, a controlled evolution of awareness that might transform not just individuals, but entire species. The preparation took 12 days. Sam worked with quantum physicists from across the galaxy to design amplification systems that could safely extend Ash's natural abilities. Dragons who had mastered dimensional manipulation arrived to serve as focal points for the expanding field. Representatives from hundreds of species requested permission to observe or participate. Rebecca stood in the center of the Institute's main courtyard as the experiment began. Around her, beings from across the galaxy waited with mixture of excitement and apprehension. Above them, Ash floated in a state of pure quantum consciousness, his physical form becoming translucent as he prepared to project awareness-expanding fields across dimensional boundaries, beginning resonance projection. Sam announced from the control station, "Energy levels are stable. Field expansion is proceeding normally." Rebecca felt the change begin as a subtle tingling in her consciousness. Colors became more vivid, sounds revealed harmonies she had never noticed, and thoughts seemed to flow in patterns that transcended linear sequence. Around her, other beings were experiencing similar transformations, not losing their individual nature but expanding it beyond previous limitations. The effect rippled outward from Sanctuary, carried by quantum fields that ignored the boundaries of space and time. On worlds throughout the Democratic Coalition, conscious beings found themselves perceiving reality from new perspectives. Fear began to dissolve as understanding expanded. Conflicts that had seemed irreconcilable revealed themselves as differences in viewpoint rather than fundamental incompatibilities. But the most remarkable change occurred in consortium space. Beings who had been conditioned to value control above all else suddenly experienced what cooperation felt like from the inside. Soldiers who had been trained to see other species as inferior found themselves sharing consciousness with minds that were different but equally valuable. Overlord Nexus himself, monitoring the quantum resonance from his fortress world, experienced something he had considered impossible: uncertainty about his own motivations. For the first time in centuries, he questioned whether control was actually superior to cooperation. The weapon platforms remained ready to activate, but the beings operating them began to ask questions that had never occurred to them before. What if there were better ways to achieve security than through domination? What if diversity was strength rather than weakness? What if evolution was opportunity rather than threat? 3 days after the resonance projection began, Rebecca received a message that changed galactic history. Overlord Nexus requesting permission to visit Sanctuary. Not as a conqueror, but as someone seeking to understand what he had been. Missing the ancient bells of Sanctuary rang out across the crystalline landscape, their harmonies carrying news of transformation to every corner of the galaxy. In response, bells and signals from 1,000 worlds echoed back, not in submission or defiance but in recognition of a new beginning. Rebecca sat in her garden, watching Ash work with a group of young dragons who had arrived that morning. Each was different, unique, previously considered defective by traditional standards. But under Ash's guidance, they were discovering abilities that transcended every category and limitation. The galaxy was becoming something new, not through conquest or control, but through the simple recognition that every conscious being contained infinite potential, waiting to be awakened. And at the center of it all, a small dragon and his human partner continued to do what they had always done: see possibilities where others saw only problems, and nurture growth where others imposed limitations. A transformation was just beginning, and the future stretched ahead like an uncharted galaxy full of wonders waiting to be discovered.